Just a quick note before we get started. I did screw up the microphone settings on my device, and if you respect your ears, just watch out for that. There are some distortions. Sorry about that. I'll try not to do that again. And on the second note, we're in lockdowns in Sydney right now, so I haven't had a chance to get a haircut. If you respect your eyes, just watch out for that. Just getting you prepared. Thanks. Like and subscribe. Don't forget. What's up, guys? My name is Ari, and welcome to another video. To be honest, I wanted to make a video about Figma and how to approach UI design, but it seems like that a lot of you guys are more interested in that research phase of design and how to approach those early stages. So that's what we're going to make this video about. I'm going to walk you guys through a very high level sort of overview of one of the real projects that I've done in the past and take you through how my thought process was and what research exercises I chose to go through and why I chose them. So let's get it. I believe that real-world examples are always more helpful, so I'll share an example of a project that I've worked on recently. Obviously, there are limitations around what I can and cannot share, so I will be changing the company name and some of the information about this project. I got this project when I was freelancing full-time, and a client basically reached out and asked me to take him through a full digital transformation project. Basically, their online presence really sucked, and they didn't really have like an internal knowledge or experience about running digital projects. And their website was a mixture of a marketing website where it would attract other people to come on and learn about the company and also hopefully convert a bunch of these people. But on top of all of that, it was a website about helping and providing a lot of different information to people who are really looking for work that are unemployed and help them get through that journey. So it was really packed with a lot of complex information, and we needed to take the user through a journey that was quite easy for them to take all of this information on board, learn from it, and successfully apply for a job. Before we get started, let's define a relatively loose design process. We start with a problem, we research and design, maybe do some early stage testing if possible, we develop and build our solution, we push it to the real world, analyze it, and learn from it. Although give or take every project goes through the same process, the approach to each of those processes is what actually changes. Therefore, when you look at a book or when you go through a course that tells you should do this in a very specific way, it doesn't necessarily always mean that if you follow that process, you will achieve the best results. What you need to do is to familiarize yourself with different research and design approaches and methods. Understand their pros and cons, understand what they help you achieve, and use them just like any other tool. Pick up the right one for the right job. Over the past 12 years of doing design and all the learnings that I've had, I've come up with a process that has been kind of suitable for me, and I am constantly and continuously evolving it as I go along. But at the moment, it goes something like this: plan, prepare, prioritize, and proceed. And I'll explain to you guys what each of those terms mean when it comes to design research, but just keep that in mind and let's just carry on. Before we get started, I want to talk about different projects and different companies. As a designer, you would most likely be working for a company that would fall under one of the following categories: startup, corporate, agency. And each of these businesses have different team sizes, business models, digital presence and expertise, goals, ways of working, red tapes, budgets, politics, and more. This is important to note because all of the above will actually impact user experience designers and design teams to conduct research and design activities. Let's give you guys some examples. Corporations typically have massive design teams and bigger budgets in order to conduct a lot of these activities. Project failures are also a lot more risky and impactful to the overall business. For example, designers always complain about how Amazon's web app is super ugly. Surely they can afford great designers that can do a better job on their site. And that's a fair point. However, if you're looking at this from a business perspective, by changing their design of their site to just simply look better or visually look better, they might be able to please a certain group of people like us designers, but their current website is obviously performing and converting well. The risk of doing doing any change that could even impact their company's revenue by 1 to 2% is a massive change to the revenue goals. There is a lot more that goes into a business than just design, and us designers need to really keep that in mind when we do design for the business and their customers. So a company like theirs might spend millions and millions of dollars on design resources, research, A/B testing, just to make tiny little incremental changes. And by doing that, they can reduce the amount of risk they're running through when they're changing any sort of a design initiative. I personally actually worked at a company where we would spend months and months just A/B testing pages just with different copy just to see if we could move the conversion needle by even 0.5% sometimes. However, on the other hand, if you work for a startup, things work quite a bit different. Timelines are much faster, things move faster, the team itself is much smaller. So for example, there are times that you could even be the only designer on the team that does UX all the way through to UI, and therefore the deadlines are much tighter, and it doesn't always leave enough room for you to run really thorough user research sprints. And that's the time that when you have to choose specific research activities that would suit your project the most. So if there's only one key takeaway that I could leave you guys with over here, is that understanding the business objectives, the business structure, and the available resources you have should impact the research activities and methods that you pick for your specific project. So now let's go through the case study. Whether you work for a company, an agency, or you're just freelancing on your own, this next step, give or take, is always going to be the same. Your employer or client will come to you with a specific business problem and they want you to solve it through design. One thing to keep in mind over here is that meetings are super time consuming and expensive, so make them count. As much as you can, research the company, the problem they're trying to solve, the goal they are trying to achieve, their team structure, stakeholders, key decision makers, and whatever else that you can get your hands on prior to the meeting. Find out how much time you'll have in your meeting as well so you can plan accordingly. Generally speaking though, the first meetings are more of an interview with the stakeholders, so try to keep them simple. What you cannot find in your self-initiated research though, you want to ask about in your meeting. Write your questions down before the meeting so you won't forget them. I would keep the first meeting super simple and just ask questions, listen, and take notes. Prioritize which questions are most important for the project and go through them first. Meetings often go over the expected time, and if you ever run out of time, you just want to make sure that you've gathered all that you need for your design. Find out if you can get access to any data point they might have. This can be things like Google Analytics, Mixpanel, or anything else. Find out how you can reach key people during your research phase when you need them. Get an understanding of the approval process. Find out about the deadline for the project. Analyze the amount of resources and budgets you have. Get clarity on the goals and objectives, things like what would make this project successful, and anything else that you could find helpful for your project. Generally, this is how I would prepare for that initial meeting. In my specific case for this specific project, I was brand new to this project, so I didn't really know too much about their business, their industry, their business model, or their competitors. So the first step for me was obviously to learn about the business before I could even touch any sort of a design activity. After that initial meeting, you now have enough knowledge to start the rest of the research activities and plannings. In my case, my client wanted to create a website that was easier to use for the customers and potentially attract new customers as well. And they were very comfortable with just completely breaking everything down and building it all back up from scratch. They didn't have much data except for a little bit of Google Analytics plugin. They didn't really know their customers that well, and therefore they didn't really have a good idea of their customer's journey map. They didn't really have a good brand presence. And to top it all off, they also had a very short 16 weeks of a deadline, which including strategy, design, planning, development, approvals, and all of that, it would only leave around maybe 4 to 6 weeks for the actual design phase, and that's end to end. The first thing that I wanted to do was to dig a little bit deeper and unpack the entire project a little bit more. I also knew that we needed to take the MVP approach, which is the minimum viable product, which basically means that start with all of the necessary stuff, build all of those out, and then start adding different features on top of it as you go go through specific research phases. This way we can make sure that we could stick with our timelines and at the same time prioritize all the features the user actually wants and build those first. And then after that, we could slowly add on to it as we go on. And after a bit of planning, I decided with the following design exercises. Website auditing. This is where I would scan, record, and analyze every single existing page on a website and create a quick audit and sitemap of the entire site. The purpose of this is to simply understand how large the entire website is, understand some user flows, check to see what widgets and tools are used across the website and find patterns, understand their branding, analyze shortcomings and gaps, plan for things you think you might need later like copy, imagery, specific software, and more, and get a sense of how large the project is overall. I usually follow up with a heuristic evaluation. This is where I go in as an UX expert and look for UX issues and gaps. Things like, do they use common best UX practices? Can we keep things and improve them, or do we need to start everything from scratch? Set a bunch of priorities based on how easy these issues are to fix versus how much of an impact they would have to the business, and create recommendations that way to your client. Analyze if the sitemap works, analyze if the user flow works, analyze if the language they use works. Basically analyze the website and document any gaps and recommendations that you might have for the customer or the client. Competitor analysis. For almost every single project that I pick up, I definitely always do competitor analysis. Competitor analysis is when you go and research other competitors a business might have and analyze how their competitors do things, like how they talk to their customers, how successful they are, what are they doing well, and what are they struggling with. Find out what their strengths and weaknesses are. Find opportunities and gaps in the market. I always do a competitor analysis, as it also gives me some good industry knowledge and I can start recording down some inspirations for later as well. It also creates a good baseline for where your design might need to go. It's quite easy to create an existing user persona by looking at current user behavior and data. Especially if the customer doesn't have existing personas, this is a great place to start. And you can always add potential and ideal user personas with a client later on in a workshop. The way that you would do this is that you simply just jump on to Google Analytics and look at things like the customer age, gender, devices they use, locations, the time that they come online, what pages they look at most, and anything else that you might find useful for your specific project. Discovery workshops are a great tool when you don't have a good starting point and you need to find out more about the business model, company structure, goals, and identify gaps and more. You should basically customize this workshop for what you need to find out about. In my case, I wanted to showcase my findings and allow stakeholders to add to my findings, identify further user personas, get further alignments on goals with the presence of all key stakeholders, go through other helpful exercises in order to make progress. User journey workshops are great to map out the user's interaction and their journey with every single touch point they would come across with a company through their life cycle. We make these by creating a focused journey for a certain user persona and discover gaps and opportunities to make their journeys as delightful as possible. I've already done a video on sitemaps, which I will link down below, but in this case, sitemaps are a great way to map out the entire platform, identify flows, identify relationships and movements around the site, and start identifying the number of pages and templates that we need to design and develop for. I also needed to plan for my user testing, and user flows are a great way to do that. It allows us to clarify key flows, identifying some of the key interactions and decisions that the user might need to take in order to go through a successful journey, and based on those, we could start creating wireframes and designs. Wireframes are the first step to doing the UI design of almost any platform. They're cheap to make, they're relatively easy and fast to put together, and they're great because they allow the design to be focused on the user experience, copy, page layout, and architecture without getting distracted too much with color, spacing, typography, and imagery. It's also one of the fastest ways to make prototypes for testing. The only thing that I do different when I want to create wireframes for prototypes is that I use real-world copy and imagery, and it doesn't really have to be the final photography or copy, just good enough so that when you put it in front of a user, they don't really get confused with what this black and white thing is that I'm looking at. User testing was quite vital for my project because I had the time and the budget to do it, but also we were designing a site from scratch, so it was vital to test it with real-world users to reduce our risks and validate our hypothesis regarding the research and the designs that we've done so far. There are many ways that you can write user testing sessions, but in this case, the recruitment of the testers was done by the company. They also supplied a location that I could test in. So all I had to do was to come up with the user flows that I wanted to test, map them out, create the right wireframes that I wanted to test with, and turn them into prototypes. I then wrote my test cases and put my questionnaires together and conducted the test with the users. The steps that I went through was really suitable for my specific project. And I decided that they were good for my project because after I had that first meeting with them and asked the right questions, I got a good feel of what they were after and I could plan for it accordingly. And then there is the topic of client management. Every time you run a project, there's always a massive back and forth between you and your client to get approvals, to make changes, to have meetings, and so many more steps. And again, I think that that deserves its own video, so I'm going to keep that for a later time. Now, I know that I only touched on the absolute surface of each of these exercises, but in the coming weeks, I'm gonna make individual videos about each of these exercises just so that I could walk you guys through them a little bit more thoroughly. And hopefully that way, when it comes to your projects, you could pick the right specific tool or exercise to help you get your work done in the best way possible. Alright, that's it for this video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe, as all of those would really help me out greatly. If you have any questions, comment them down below. And if you really enjoyed the video, feel free to share it with others. And I'll see you guys in the next one.
Let's go. See the sun shining from the windows. Okay, I know that today'll be a good day. Okay, I know that today'll be a good day.